You have to run with the music.
So it's not background music.
No. And it takes about 10 listenings before you finally get it. You have to work your way up into it. It's not something you just dive into. It started with the Italians in what's called polyphonic music, when they learned how to play 2 or more notes simultaneously.
When was that?
That started in about the 1500s. That's when the music basically, as we understand it, became invented.
1500?
Yeah, the Italians were the ones that did most of this. With an Italian priest named Antonio Vivaldi.
Vivaldi.
Yeah, was the one that really pushed all before. But all of the Italian musicians, particularly Frescobaldi and Gabrielli, are 2 of them. That developed the initial polyphonic music. And then Bach became the master of it. And then Handel was the great popularizer of it. So you Handel, Bach, Vivaldi, Gabrielli, and what was the other one? Gabrielli and Frescobaldi.
Luther? Martin Luther? No.
Martin Luther was the beginning. He wrote the initial pieces of music.
For the organ of the church.
Well, the initial, that was still the Pythagorean modal music.
So all this comes from Pythagoras.
Yeah, it all comes from Pythagoras.
The modal music, you call it. Modal.
Yeah, it's, the only pieces of it remain. It's called major and minor.
Major and minor?
Yeah, well, those are all part of what are called church modes.
Church mode.
Yeah, those are extensions from the original Pythagorean system, and they had the distortion factors. Bach finally distorted the whole thing and erased it, and made it a pure logarithm. So music, from that point on, always sounded harsh. But that's the only way he could play in all keys. Otherwise, you had to retune the organ for every key you played. See, it didn't matter with the voice because you could move the frequency everywhere. There was a stringed instrument, but the organ is the first digital device. It's an analog computer, but it's a digital keyboard. So now you're stuck to discrete frequencies. So every key you have to retune the organ.
So the organ was the world's first digital device?
Yeah, well, actually the clavichord.
Clavichord.
Clavichord, which turned into the harpsichord and the pipe organ. The pipe organ is one of the oldest. And with all the stops and the pipes, it's an analog computer of incredible complexity. It's a waveform synthesizer.
And the organ is a waveform?
Yeah, they can't make them anymore. And the old ones are all the metal fatigue and everything. They're all rotten. It's all gone now.
They can't make them anymore?
They don't know how to make any of that stuff.
Are you serious?
It's too complicated. They couldn't do it. None of that can be duplicated. That was made by masters. They just did it all in their head. The guy that made organs with 20,000 pipes, you know how he measured the spectrum? He went into the church and took a stick and threw it on the ground and listened to the echoes, let that cook in his head, and build a 15,000 pipe organ out of it that resonated with the church. And there was no insurance back then. If you fucked up, your head got fed to the fish.
But no pressure, right?
It just simply worked. It wasn't even a question whether it was going to work, because if it didn't, you died.
So these masters that made the organ, that was it?
Silbermann made most of the great organs in Germany.
So who?
Silbermann.
Silbermann.
Yeah. And then, I don't know who made, France had their own brand. France made some incredible sounding organs, but they sounded different than the German organs. And then the English, had their organs and all that, and all of them are resonant, they're analog computers. You build waveforms by adding harmonics. You can make any kind of waveform you want. And the physical feeling of being in the churches when these things are running in full power is beyond description.
Really?
Particularly when all the planets are lined up.
Wow.
Scares the organists. The whole church sounds like it's going to come apart. The organists start to lose control. The whole thing gets wrapped up into the cosmic event.
This is the ultimate rave party.
And just goes wild. And it leaves the audience in complete shock. Thousands of people just like stunned in shock. They had a grand organ concert at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco right during the planetary alignment. That church was smart. They played that whole solar cycle, and they did a series of 12 organ concerts. Half of the music was Bach. And it got nearer and nearer the planetary alignment. the performances started becoming more and more stunning, and larger quantities of people started showing up. So finally, the last one, there's only one seat to sit in the whole church, where all the phases line up. We'd always get those seats beforehand, hours beforehand, and make sure they were reserved.
Your family?
No, me and David.
Oh, here?
Yeah, in San Francisco, David Franklin.
So they had an organ.
We were doing that whole Sonoma State study, and the organ concert series was in that exact sync with the solar flares. And you had, of course, you were there at every one of those concerts, and they just lit that church up. We'd spend days preparing for these events, hiking around in the woods and just like living on fruits and vegetables. You had to take at least a 10-mile hike before the organ concert, and then get there at the top of that mountain, and then there's a couple other things you do, and you have your seats are all arranged right where all four organs, pipe organs, cross. In the cross of the church itself, they're all built like giant crosses, and they have four organs in them. They have the forward and reflected organs, the giant ones in front and back, and then they got the side organs, and there's two seats on either side of the aisle in the middle, and you get those seats, all the waves add up in that spot, and it produces, you go out of your body. You just go out, during the concert, you just go out of your body. You're not even in normal world anymore. The whole thing just completely overwhelms you. And you can actually see the music and the whole, but just in that one spot. So the grand concert, the church was too crowded, so they had to put everybody out in the main thing. But the organ concert built up so much power that the whole church went, right after the concert ended, the whole church went silent. There wasn't any applause. And the organists were like frozen, staring like with weird looks on their face at their keyboards. The whole place just like went dead. It was quiet. No one was clapping or anything. And then all of a sudden, all 1,000 people jumped up for a simultaneous standing ovation, like the church had never seen. It just blew everybody away.
How long was that standing ovation?
It was the concert went on for about 2 hours.
Wow.
And it built with like one of Bach's most famous organ works, the horror movie one.
Toccata in Fugue?
D minor. Yeah,
Oh!
he wrote that when he was 18 years old. But I don't like that. It's juvenile and it's too dark and whatever. But these guys and the church and the alignment and the whole thing gave it a rendition of that piece of music that just wiped everybody out, including them. They lost control of the whole resonance. The building literally felt like it was going to fly apart. There was no concept of space or time anymore. You got wrapped up into this Bach cosmic cycle, and it just kept working you phase after phase, and it got deeper and faster, and the voltage higher and higher, and it just wiped everybody out, wiped the whole audience and the organists out. And it was stunning, because when you walked in, all the planets and the moon and the sun and everything were all lined up. And this thing started at sunset.
So 1980.
1980, October 13th, 1980.
October 13th, 1980.
Yeah.
And it was on top of a hill.
In San Francisco, Grace Cathedral is a duplicated cathedral. It's a 7,200 pipe organ driven by like a 25 horsepower blower.
Wow. So those organs, you can put each one in a place.
You add all the harmonics in space and time, and you can make pressure, you can make entities in that church. The church is built like an Alexanderson antenna. The columns are all loaded. And you have standing wave organs pointed at each other. So you can maneuver these harmonics around in the space and position them. And they have like littler harmonics. They're like ball bearings, like those pictures of atoms. And you build these things into space, and if you're sitting in one of those zones, if you put an altimeter in there, like my altimeter, the thing will go wild. The pointer will just start dancing around. There's intense like low pressure and high pressure centers, and they coalesce like a giant molecular structure in the church. Wow. And the master organist and the organ builder knows how to control all those things. So the organ is part of the church, and the whole thing turns into a giant analog waveform generator. And then the music of Bach is designed to magnify that. On top of it, creates a backwards time cycle. The music actually starts and ends at both ends. That's the problem with it. No one knows how he did it.
Bach.
Yeah, there is no end or beginning. The end is the beginning. The beginning is like Steinmetz's equations. They go backwards and forwards in time and make things happen in between.
So
Bach could use these alternating current cycles to work this stuff and just build these energies.
Bach was AC.
Well, it's time. It's all time-based. He knew how to make music go backwards in time and forwards in time and fit together. He wrote a 20-piece organ piece just before he died. That's the one that I studied at Boletus because I had the Marconi building as my own cathedral. This all happened during the alignment. And I had giant stereo, and I studied that music for hours and days. It took months of listening to it to finally get the picture. It was enough to knock you out of your chair, particularly in that building. Philo would come out there, and he would just stand there frozen with tears in his eyes and just completely frozen by the sounds. In the space. And we used to bring him out there to heal him with it because he was all screwed up on drugs and booze and psychosis and the whole thing. So we bring him out there and fire the whole, sound system up in the Marconi building, get him all high on vegetable juice and the whole thing, and it would just go through his body and just all of a sudden, he would just freeze. It would be rejuvenated.
It worked.
Yeah, I used to deliberately sit between the speakers. And friends of mine that had back problems, I convinced them to sit between the speakers and let the stuff pass through your body, and it regenerates your body. You have to sit in between the speakers, just like being in between all those organs in the church.
Like a multi-wave oscillator.
Well, it's a mechanical thing. It's kind of like ultrasonics.
Mechanical, just the air pressure.
Yeah, the vibration.
So the vibrations of the air hitting.
Well, and your body. When the sound waves go through your body, they move your body. And you're in a standing wave zone in between speakers, just like you're standing in between the organs of the church, and there's these zones, and they move around. They make things fly off the bench.
Anti-gravitic.
Well, it creates a vortex, and it throws things from the surface. The waves in the bench move around. They throw things into the
So
surface.
when you were sitting in there in that church, did you feel a current in the room?
You feel this stuff moving through your body like you're invisible.
Like the ether. It's actually moving.
Solid stuff. You can actually, when your mind is trained and you're tuned into the whole thing, most people wouldn't even get this.
Yeah, you're an extreme sensitive.
Yeah, we prepared days for this stuff. Days, sometimes weeks, to get ready to be at that level for the full voltage.
Wow. Wow.
And then they're at the spot, and you just close your eyes and go into another universe.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow, that sounds
you're just like gone. And then you're so high from it afterwards, you walk the full 30 miles back to Boletus and end up there the next morning. Because it's a planetary alignment, total planetary alignment or whatever, there's always a full moon.
Did it make you stronger, that experience? Like physically, did you feel just rejuvenated, healed, strengthened? What?
I don't know. I mean, it's just fun,
But you got that experience.
No idea. Of course you feel good. That's why you walk all 30 miles back to Boletus.
All 30 miles?
Yeah, over Mount Tam.
Mount Tam?
Yeah, over the ridge, 1,800 feet. You have to walk across the Golden Gate Bridge. Usually it's closed then. You got to take the bus across the bridge.
So you walked all the way to
All the way
San
back to
Diego.
Boletus.
From Bolinas? You can walk from Bolinas to San Francisco?
Yeah, I used to do it all the time.
There's a bridge?
Well, you have to walk across the Golden Gate Bridge. At certain hours you can't do that. They have to take the bus across. Then you take it on foot from there.
So altogether it's 30 miles?
Yeah, it's about 30 miles. It's a brutal hike. The concert ends about 9 o'clock, and then you get out there and you're hoofing about 4 or 5 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
You got Mount Tam ahead of you. Plus you got to get out to the bridge. You got to get over the first ridge in Mill Valley, 800 feet. Okay, you got to march that. Then you go back. Then it takes you back down to Muir Woods. You lose all your elevation. Then you got to fight yourself up from 200 feet up to 1,800 feet in the dark in the redwoods. So if the moonlight, you march over that, and then it's all downhill to Stinson Beach. You get to Stinson Beach. It's really steep down. You got to be careful not to land on your ass, fall into the sticks. You get down there, and then it's an 8-mile walk from there to downtown Bolinas on Highway 1. And by the time you get to Bolinas, the sun's coming up.
Did you have a beer?
And you're
after
finally
the hike?
tired.
What was was the first drink you had?
I don't know. I think he just went to sleep. I don't particularly remember much after once arriving in Bolinas, you know.
Wow.
That's about the only time I'd see David dragging his feet behind me. Usually he was in front of me.
Your friend, David.
Yeah,
Frank.
he's the only guy that could keep up with this stuff. He had the mind and the body for it.
Wow.
You know, he was ready. He was an abandoned child. So and I picked a number of these the discarded youth up off the streets, and they turned out to be the real geniuses and people to hang out with.
What luck. Lucky you. Lucky them. Picked them up. Saved them.
Yeah, well, you know, I pulled about 3 or 4 people out of the gutter, you know, that ran there out in the bush with me for a decade or so.
Wow.
You know, eventually they go crazy or get into drugs or something bad happens to them or they get ripped off or, you know, all of a sudden I end up in a whole different state or whatever. You know, when I moved to L.A., that was the end of all that.
Really?
There's no, you know, living in the bush like that down there in L.A., you got to have a job.
Oh, yeah. In town.
But the woods were freer there. See, I couldn't live in my car up north. It's all closed. You have to slither around there like a rat at night. But in Southern California, back then, there weren't any gates or fences. Then I could really live outside the way I wanted to. I didn't have to have a place to go to. That's how this came about. This was kind of a commute stop between Fallon and Landers. I just started staying longer and longer and longer and longer, and then eventually there was no reason to leave. There was nowhere to go to. That's where it's at now. So I don't know, is this thing still recording me?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay.
That's enough.